Thank you, Tisha. Mayor, what do you have for us?
So in fact, follow. The report will be short and sweet. You've heard all of the financials. You've heard the steps that are being taken. Essentially, East Cleveland, after 50 years almost of population loss, job loss, revenue decline, and all the things associated with that, when the city goes from 40,000 residents to 17,000 residents, when of those 17,000 residents, 5,000 work, it's a difficult road to hoe. And there are a lot of indications that in Ohio, a city must rely on the revenue that is generated from the economic activity within its borders. And if you look at the numbers that we just cited, going from 40,000 population to 17,000 population, of those 17,000, 5,000 work, not to mention all of the job flight and wealth flight that has happened over the past 50 years, to rely on the economic activity within the borders of the city of East Cleveland to generate the revenue that is required, necessary to run a city with a full fleet of fire and EMS, a full fleet of police, a full fleet of all the emergency equipment you would ever want or need, a fully functioning service department, parks and recreation, senior services, and patching potholes, and by the way, replacing an entire city worth of streets and keeping the lights on with $3 million in deficit funds. There comes a time when we have to consider the potential that there is just not the economic activity within the city's borders to generate enough revenue to run a city in Ohio. So that time is upon us. I think all the numbers and all these meetings say that, whether this is your first meeting or your second meeting or your 20th meeting. That's just part of the reality. When it comes to that reality, there are wholesale changes that need to be made, or at least contemplated. Essentially, our economic unit is not functioning the way that it should in order to provide the revenue. We need to change in some way, shape, or form the economic unit. Not the individuals that run the same economic unit with the same economic configuration and revenue drivers, but a different economic unit with different revenue drivers. So it basically boils down to there's at least one big option out there. I think the community has expressed what it would like to see contemplated, just contemplated and talked about, and that is a merger with a neighboring city that simply needs to have a commission and panel in order to go forward. We've made all the cuts that one can make. One thing that's not mentioned in these financial reports is the only places to really cut now are safety forces. Once you get past one or two individuals left working for the city, the only places really to cut now are the safety forces. And it's because the size and strength of the economic unit does not generate enough revenue to run a city in the state of Ohio, particularly one where almost every street needs to be replaced. I could say that for about 15 more minutes. I could add about 20 more examples, and that would still leave 1,000 examples left that could be added and 1,000 minutes that could be talked about. But might as well keep it short and sweet at this point. After all these meetings, the only thing that has changed is we are managing less and less money, and we see that there's less and less money coming in. And in reality, East Cleveland needs a whole lot more money than we have available to us in order to provide the quality of services and security, basic life existence that people have now.
Can I ask, what are the new generating or economic drivers that were suggested in the financial report that you said, when we were talking about the cushion being only $8,000, but you said there was an expectation that we could generate more resources so that the cushion wasn't $8,207. What were you referring to?
The major one, traffic enforcement. We, as a city, you know, when you're in desperate times, you grasp at straws. Cities should really be built on the encouragement of economic activity and the encouragement of development, which we try to do. And a lower priority, but still important, is, well, an important priority is law enforcement. There is an important element of law enforcement, which is traffic control. And there should be some revenue derived from that. But a city should not engage in things that are solely meant to penalize people because the city's in need of money. We can enforce traffic. We can do that to make the community safer. But when it's considered as something to allow a city to get by on bare bones because it has nothing else coming in terms of revenue, we have to seriously consider who and what we are when we get to that point. So to answer your question, there is one revenue enhancement mechanism that we have. It's the increased traffic enforcement. We always try and do economic development. We try and get new businesses in town. Some come, but many don't.
And that's the elephant in the room, is that there is no easy way to change and make the place a place for external investment. So the investment is only for people who have either a connection to the place or are here already, and that is a dwindling group.
And Dr. Kaver, to your point, the reality is that Northeast Ohio is craving investment. There's a lack of investment everywhere. There's drops in population everywhere. And some of those economic units, most of those cities can weather the storm because they have the economic base that's required to weather the storm. But when we come to East Cleveland, we have to seriously ask ourselves, do we have the economic base to weather this type of storm where everybody is craving investment because there's very little new investment in the region, not just the city?
So if you're here, you have a better choice, right? So if you're coming to Northeast Ohio, then there are other places that could offer a bit more than what East Cleveland offers. And the bedroom community model just doesn't work in modern metropolitan areas.
Right.
And we're a bedroom community. Maple Heights is one, Warrensville Heights, and increasingly you can't do it on income tax alone from residents who are asked to remit the tax themselves at that, right? So not only do you only have 5,000 people who are working, of that 5,000, I don't know what that number is, but I know in one of these spaces, the amount that are going to actually pay their tax to East Cleveland might be 3,000. The other ones have an address at a local place in Cleveland, so they don't get double taxed.
That's the economic problem that we face. But there are so many things that are required to address an economic problem that the pieces that we employ, unless we put them all together at the same time, are not strong enough to address an economic problem.
What about the building development that we've heard about next to the cemetery? Is that a...
Yes.
Yes. What do you expect from that?
There will be redevelopment there. There'll be a couple of redevelopments along Euclid Avenue. They'll generate, each of them, probably several $1,000s in income tax revenue from the residents or businesses that might locate there. That income tax revenue will be several years off because they just take a while to build and occupy and then tax after a year in existence. So that's a good thing. The challenge, though, is that it's such a small increase from such a small geographic area. It's not enough to really right the ship for the entire economic unit of East Cleveland.
Now, ask the financial supervisors. If we look at, I think where we were maybe 4 years ago and maybe 4 years ago, it might be longer than that now. The actual bare bones budget for East Cleveland would need to be about $15 million. Is that it? If you were just looking at the general fund, you may not have the answer, but I think 5 or 6 years ago, that number was 15 million, where you weren't.
16, 17.
Yeah, and so whatever you're doing, you're talking about coming from 10, let's just use the 16. You need 60% more revenue. And if you need 60% more revenue, that means that every year, that means that you would have to virtually overhaul the entire city, right? So 60% of the city would have to be overhauled.
And it would all have to pay in at once. And this, when I give a mayor's report, I try and make it brief. Something that I should have included is that we're talking about this as a snapshot in many cases. But if we expand the snapshot beyond 2016, those who, Jack, are council members, who are here day to day, see how difficult it was for this city to trim $700,000 from its budget in 2016. The financial recovery plan requires another $1 million in cuts for 2017, which we have to start now. So we just finished cutting $700,000, we have to cut another $1 million. And then at the end of 2017, going into 2018, the plan calls for $2.8 million in cuts. Essentially, a budget that was $11 million last year has to go down to $7 million in a couple of years. That's 35% of the budget, when we're already not able to afford police and firefighters. I mean, it's just devastating, a devastating situation. And with that, there's probably a fire alarm. Or maybe that's the alarm saying I'm important.
I said it all.
That was not time.
Yeah, something I said.
I don't know if that I could say any more than that. I'd like to do quick and not dirty, but quick math, because that's all I'm able to do. If we look at, just looking at the appropriations, the last thing that we looked at, we're looking at estimated resources. We take 9.9 million. But at the end of this year, say that is what we'll get in revenue in 17. We'll already have a deficit of 3.2 million in the general fund. Add to that 3.4 million in past due payables, 6.6, and you're only, if you're lucky, going to get 9.9. That leaves you $3 million some dollars to run a city.
Can't be right.
That's the fire department. That's the fire department. And what we're accustomed to dealing with, I think, in local governments, and really all over, is problems with costs. We're able in local governments everywhere to deal with problems, cost overruns. We cut down costs. But what local governments rarely face, and what we're beginning to face, is problems with revenue. We can't add to the revenue. And there's only so many costs that we can cut. And I think what we see in East Cleveland is, you know, a lot of people say, well, you cut the fat, you cut the fat. There's only, essentially, there's only a court and police department and fire department with a little bit of a service department left. That's it. And when we talk about additional cuts, to cut another 35% from this budget over the next 4 years, we have to choose either a police department or a fire department. We cannot have both. And we've seen the cost of trying to contract for fire and EMS with a neighboring city. It's higher than what we currently pay right now. So,
Because our neighbors aren't strong.
right.
Right? I mean,
Right, and they're not stupid.
They're not charging them.
Yes, again,
Because they need revenue as well.
it's the economic unit. And this group has spent a few years now pondering the same things. And, you know, we need look no further than what has been discussed here for the past few years. And the only question now is, how long do we allow the residents and businesses here to go down the road to either a police department or a fire department? That's the only question now. That's how long are we going to take to act?
It's no kind of choice, that's for sure.